Hello and welcome to another rowing coaching video. In today's video I'm going to talk about how to seat race. So if you're a coach who's just starting off and doesn't quite know how to seat race, hopefully this will be good information for you. If you're an athlete wondering how to seat race well, I've got a few tips for you as well. And just so you understand how seat racing works, seat racing is an on-the-water assessment. So as a coach you get data actually on the water to see who's moving boats better than other people. Also, in terms of a exercise for training, it's as I said, an on-the-water assessment, but it's a competitive environment that you can do within your team. And the benefit of it is that your crews, your athletes get side-by-side racing, and so there's lots of benefits to it. I know there's a little bit of argument about the validity of seat racing and whether it's a fair assessment. It is a helpful tool. It is one tool in your coach's toolkit. It is not the only thing that you should be using to select your crews, but it is helpful. In my experience, it's been quite helpful, both as a training tool and as a manner of assessment. So what is seat racing and how does it work? Well, seat racing can take the form of very many different boat types: pairs, fours, eights. It's really up to you. On the board I've got straight fours as an example, but you could go with Cox fours as well. And what happens here essentially is two boats will race one another, maybe more than two boats, but we'll stick to two boats in this example. You'll time the margin between the two boats and then switch two rowers, one from one boat, one from another boat, then set the crews back to the start line again and do the same kind of piece, same rate and those kinds of things, and then time the margin between the boats. And from the margins and the relative margins, you have some information about who's moving a boat a little bit better than another person. So that's in a nutshell. The logistics of this is, so you've got two boats and you should have an idea about who you want to seat race, because you've got to be thinking about what lineups to put out. In this particular seat race, I'm going to seat race orange versus red. And so what we do is we start both crews up. They should be level, and either it's a standing start or a tension row type situation, or you can have the crews row up at half pressure, working with the coxswains to make sure the bows are level, and then you can say in 3 to build, and off they go. So it could be a rolling start, could be a standing start. About coxswains, usually your coxswains are silent except for telling the rates and the amount of time that the piece has gone, how much time we've done. I think that's an important part of it, so you can take another variable out of the equation, the coxswain. Another thing to watch out for is if boat A starts on the left and boat B starts on the right, it should do that every single time. You again want to be holding those variables constant. Another variable to hold constant is the stroke rate. So be talking to the athletes before you go out there, decide what the stroke rate is that you want them to do. It could be as low as 24, it could be 28, it could be 32, but everybody agrees on what it is, and that way it's consistent and everybody understands that's the same. There's no point in somebody switching into another crew and then rating 4 beats higher, because that's not giving you a fair assessment of one rower versus another. So keeping that consistent. Another thing to hold consistent is your stroke seats. Typically the stroke seats stay constant. You can switch stroke seats. With that said, you can switch stroke seat for stroke seat, but then you're doing a seat race against who can stroke better than another person. And so if you keep the stroke seats constant, and you keep that variable constant. So off the crews go, and after about 4 to 6 minutes, you don't want to seat race over 2 minutes. I don't see the value in that. But 4 to 6 minutes, maybe as much as 2K, depending on what you're assessing, and both crews rating 30 strokes per minute straight across. And then they finish, and in this particular race, both crews are equal. So the margin between the two boats are equal. So you could bring your launch up slightly ahead before you time it, make sure you watch your wash, and or you can have somebody on the bank do it. I mean, it depends what you're doing, but if you're running it as a coach on your own, and then get the crews ahead and then time the difference between the bows and then make a note of that. So the difference in this case was 0 seconds. They were both tied. Now it's a decision about who we want to seat race and who we want to switch. So in this particular example, I'm going to switch orange for red, and so I switch them, And as you can see over here, now the red rower is in this boat and the orange rower is in this boat. And we do the same thing again. Off they go, 30 strokes per minute. And then the race is finished 4 to 6 minutes later. Keep the same amount of time. Again, hold those variables constant. And in this particular case, boat A is beating boat B, and the margin that I time between the two bows is 3 seconds. So what's the conclusion? Well, the conclusion here is that if they were tied before, and now the orange rower is in this boat, and now it's ahead, the winner of that seat race was the orange rower. So orange over red by 3 seconds. So it's important to understand that it's all relative, okay? So it's not necessarily whether you win the piece or not, it's how was it relative to the piece before. So if you're going into a crew that was 10 seconds ahead of you, you better make sure if you're going to win your seat race that you're faster than 10 seconds on the next one. If you're going into a crew that's 10 seconds behind another crew and you make that margin only 6 seconds, you've won your seat race by 4 seconds. So there's a lot of psychology in this, and it's important to understand that it's all relative. It's not whether or not you win the actual piece. It's all relative to what has happened before. So finally, what we want to do is race 3. So we'll do a couple of seat races here. And what I want to do is I want to switch the purple rower with the green rower. So now we've got the green rower over here and the purple rower over here, and we race them off. And now boat B is ahead of boat A by what we'll say, for argument's sake, that's another 3 seconds. Okay, so what's happened here is actually a 6-second swing. Boat A was ahead by 3 seconds with the green rower in it, and then the green rower switched over to here to the slower boat and actually made the B boat go a little bit faster and relative to the A boat. So this boat was down, now it's ahead by 3 seconds, so the result of this seat race, if you follow it, is green over purple. So we'll write that down because you're going to be making notes as you go. Green over purple by, this time it's 6 seconds. Okay, and so you go. So you don't know, you're not telling your rowers, or your athletes shouldn't know how many pieces you're going to row. We may row 10 more pieces, which would be quite painful, but I suppose you could do that in some way. And if you wanted to, you could switch one of those rowers. So if you wanted to compare the green rower against the orange rower, which we've got orange versus red and we got green versus purple, let's tie those together, and then we race green versus orange and get the margin. Then you start to create a stacking list of the rowers in your program. If you're an athlete watching this, your attitude, if you want to win a seat race, is to get in the crew and figure out how to make the other 3 around you row better. That should really be your attitude for any outing or race, really, is how can I get into this crew and how can I make the other 3 or the other 7 or the other 1 in this boat row better. And if you have that mentality, that again cultivates this idea of teamwork, and it also will help you, rather than you trying to get in the boat and having the mentality, well, how can I win this seat race? It should be, how can we win this seat race? So there's probably more to do with seat racing, and again, it's one of those things that you get better at with experience. I personally have had a lot of success with seat racing. Again, not the be-all and end-all of crew selection, but certainly a tool in the coach's toolkit. And as an athlete, if you want to do well in your seat racing, start training consistently. If you're doing 5-minute pieces, let's say you're doing 4 5-minute pieces, and you make all of those 5-minute pieces as equal as possible, you're setting yourself up for a seat race because you don't know when you're going to be switched. So if you get switched on the 4th piece going into the 5th piece and you've been training on the erg or whatever consistently, you have a better chance of doing well because you just never know. And you might get switched twice. Just because you get switched once doesn't mean the coach is going to just sit there and just take that. You might get switched again. And good coaches are very, very good about finding rowers that are working hard, or those rowers that are not trying, and all of a sudden you get switched. So again, there's an honest component to this, but your mentality should be, who is the fastest on this team fairly? And that way the whole team wins. So Brief video, hope you enjoyed it. If you haven't liked the channel, please subscribe in the corner below, and catch up with me on my website, coachbergenroth.com, for more rowing tutorials and videos and training plans. And again, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Happy rowing.